The Human Sciences Research Council, that's the HSRC, they hosted a webinar under the title Violence and Collective Agency of Young People in the Global South. Now, the event, which hosted guests from other parts of the globe, also focused on different topics, including material deprivation, how young people reconstruct identities, and, of course, experiences of violence and how conflict and violence have been routinized and the psychological impacts thereof. Now, Sakhiwo Rala from the Cape Town community-based organization called Build SA, and Terran Williams, author, researcher and educator, join us now just to take a look at some of the threats that came out of that particular webinar. Thanks so much, Terran and Sakhiwo, for joining us this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
It's great to be with you. Morning, Sakina. Thank you for having us.
Absolute pleasure on our side. Terran, let me start with you. So South Africa continues to see rather high levels of violence, not only in the youth, by the way, but in the nation generally. And if we look at the causes of this violence and, the levels to which it seems to be escalating, at least the violence in our society, what are some of the reasons that we can attribute this to?
So I agree with you that we have got a major crisis in our land, possibly the greatest pandemic that we're facing as a country. And it's taken a whole society to create the gender-based violence crisis, and I think it's going to take the whole of society to solve it. I'm looking forward to the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence in South Africa. But as you know, something like 1 in 2 women experience gender-based violence in our country. A woman is 5 times more likely to be killed because she is a woman than in other countries. And in South Africa, every 3 hours, a woman is killed, on our land. And when we're speaking about gender-based violence, we are speaking about, the extreme versions of killing a woman or raping a woman, but it can also be sexually abusing a woman, hitting a woman. It could even be just making unwanted physical contact, touching breasts, buttocks. And then it's psychological too, making threats, making sexual comments, name calling, spreading gossip about girls. And it's not too hard to work out that the problem in this situation is men. There is a war on women. But the question is, what is the solution? And the army that can actually win this war is men. The work that Sakhiwo and I do, we try train men to be part of the solution. I remember Mandela's words: freedom cannot be achieved unless women have been emancipated from all kinds of oppression. So we hear the words of Tata reminding us to be freedom fighters in the cause of uplifting our sisters. There are many different causes for gender-based violence. There's systemic factors, poverty, generational trauma. But the work that I do when trying to get hold of young men and train them up to treat women better is to especially tackle the stereotypes that men have about men that cause them to be more violent towards women, and those stereotypes men have about women that cause them to see women as less than them or cause them to see women as bowing down to meet their needs. So there's a deep worldview factor here. There's something in our society where men see themselves and see women in a certain way that causes them to be violent towards women. And you actually have to get into the heads of men and help them to see things in a new way.
How difficult is that to do, though, Terran? Given, as you say, I beg your pardon, given that some of this is, almost entrenched in our way of thinking, in the way in which perhaps we are socialized.
Yeah. So it's very difficult, but it's not impossible. And certainly collective effort at every level of community life. The work that I get to do is in schools. Most of the young people in our country are in schools. That's an access point to boys. So if we can get with young men, we can at least start moving in the direction of a solution.
Now, Sakhiwo, some of the areas covered in the discussions were how young people are actually marginalized by constructs such as class, religion, and others. Now, do these categories of marginalization actually add or exacerbate the situation, especially given that young people are facing so many issues, so many factors that those of us who are slightly older are really struggling to understand and grapple with?
Once again, thank you, Sakina. And indeed, the answer is yes. Young people, particularly those that are in the township, find themselves, marginalized in all kinds of ways. Economically, they find themselves, staying far away, from where real life, economic life is happening. They live far away from opportunities. They don't have access, to things that are important, things that matter, like education and all that. Now, a case in point is if you look at, the Fees Must Fall movement and campaign, which kind of, put this whole thing to the spotlight. Young people had to really rise up and begin to fighting, just for the right they already have. It's something that is enshrined in the Constitution, but they had to emphasize it by really fighting for the right. So indeed, Sakina, the answer is a big, big yes. Even taking it further to say that even COVID-19 became a highlighter, of note, bringing these things, to the fore, bringing the fact that many young people are marginalized. They don't have access to technology. They don't have access to infrastructure. And sometimes for these young people to highlight their plight, they find themselves involved, in violent activities. And we look at young people who have role models. Rather, the only people that carry the badge of success, is criminals, people involved in corruptions, people that seem to be progressing and succeeding are those that are involved, in the wrong kind of things. So I'm saying that to say that marginalization continues to exacerbate the matter, and young people need access. They need to feel like they belong. They need to feel like the Constitution is for them as well. All the promises made in that Constitution are theirs as well. So it's a big, big problem, and it really needs to be solved because it's a ticking bomb.
And we just have to apologize there, Sakhiwo, just the bandwidth to your connection seems a bit low, but we did get the gist of that. Terran, just coming back to you, the question of the violence. Now, where does this violence come from? Because you think of a case of a lecturer who wrote on social media that when he suffered a bout of depression, he wanted to rape and kill his 2-year-old daughter. And, that just boggles the mind. Why? Why is the victim, a child? Why is it a female? Where does this violence stem from?
Well, that is quite an extreme example, that UCT lecturer. I suspect that the social media comment he was giving insight into his struggle of depression, was explaining how crazy your thoughts can go. But depression is a good example because feelings of depression are connected with feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness. And when you feel powerless and hopeless, you're that much more inclined to use the tiniest little bit of power you've got for harm. Hurting people hurt people. So in the mind of this UCT lecturer, his example is, he looks at his own innocent little 2-year-old daughter, and he has thoughts of hurting her. And this is an example of, it's kind of a snapshot into the psyche of a traumatized generation. There's a lot of research done into generational trauma, where hurt people hurt people. So certainly violence is connected with opportunity. Where judicial and policing systems are broken, violence can thrive without account. Where people don't know their rights, violence can also thrive. But where feelings of powerlessness are great, violence tends to be greater also. There's a lot of work to be done in all the things that Sakhiwo was talking about. I think he really hit it on the head, that the marginalization of youth is back behind the violence. But we need to solve the problem systemically. We also need to solve the problem in terms of actually getting to these young people. There's a shortage of role models. Sakhiwo's point brilliantly made. They're looking up to criminals as their role models. That is a ticking time bomb. How to mobilize as many young people and adults as possible who have got mentoring capacity. They don't have to be trained professionals, but just capacity to work with these young people. And again, I'm hopeful that the schooling system, although not perfect, will give us some access to these young lives. So some of the most exciting NGOs I know of are in the townships, and they provide peer mentors. That's at least part of the solution. So it's very depressing if you look at it in one way, but we simply can't afford to be overwhelmed when there are things we can do, that we can mobilize. It's a society-wide problem, so it's going to require a society-wide solution. And we have seen in the history of our country, society mobilizing together. 1976, we saw the youth of the country, who were very marginalized, rise up to be agents of change, and we can hope and pray for the same in our time.
And, and I want to come to, what the youth can offer, the strength of this collective. But before we do that, I can't help but think, when you think about the violence that is perpetrated, and unfortunately, many people suffer in silence. You've got these young people, young men, a lot of the time, who are completely out of control. You've got families that suffer because often they are abusing substances, and the families simply do not know what to do, where to turn to. Just in terms of psychosocial support or any type of support, because very often law enforcement agencies are not helpful. So where do families turn to when they are dealing with violent, out of control youth?
Mm-hmm. Sakhiwo, I think you're the specialist in that question.
Okay. Sakina, I think family has a role to play. Community-based organizations such as NGOs, churches, has a big role to play in that space. I still think that there needs to be a gross mobilization in the area of community-based organization, because remember the concept of Ubuntu, umntu ngabantu. It's in those spaces where we work as a collective, where we come together as a community, carry each other. Sometimes just having an ear to listen to, somebody to speak to you, can go a very long way. Unfortunately, as we spoke about marginalization, we don't have those professional services where they are really needed. So it is the people rising up, coming together, finding solutions together, building again that community sense, that sense of community, sense of camaraderie, doing life together, finding ways to solve the problems together. There's no easy solution, as Terran said, but we have to try. As you said, Sakina, the police are trying, correctional services are trying, but we have to take responsibility at some level. It's a very complex situation.
But should we not be declaring an emergency of sorts, Terran? Because this problem is much bigger than we tend to want to recognize in South Africa. We have a massive problem. You think of the Ellen Paki's story, where this mother was so desperate that she killed her own child. Not only because he was abusing substance, but because he was so violent. He was terrorizing his own family. his own mother. So this is the reality of many more South Africans, many more than we actually think.
Said it's an alarming situation.
So sorry about that, Terran. Just having a bit of a problem with the bandwidth on the connections. But I suppose as we wrap this up, you know, in a country that has 70% young people who are unemployed by the expanded definition, about 8% of those, according to Stats SA, do have a degree, but of course struggling to find a job. Where can we locate the voice and the agency of these young people? We know that they can bring about change. We saw that with the generation of 1976, but is that not perhaps part of the frustration, the fact that they don't know how to, where to be heard? And I'm going to give both of you a shot at that as we wrap this up. Terran?
Okay, let me go for it. There is a saying, Sakina, that unity is power. And it is, you know, in that coming together, in that unity, that these can be achieved. However, unity requires leadership. Unity requires vision. Unity requires, you know, shared values. It's time for, you know, community people to rise up, you know, take leadership. You know, it's time for vision. It's time, you know, the 1976 generation knew what the problem was. You know, they united against the problem, find a way to solve it, fought for freedom. And I think this generation needs to be united towards, you know, a common vision, a vision that can really help turn things around.
If I can just add that it's a systemic problem, but male stereotypes is such an important thing for society to tackle. And if you think about how people think of what a real man is a warrior, he's aggressive, a real man is bold, he's fearless, a real man has no emotions except anger, a real man is in control, a real man is a womanizer, he has sex with many women, a real man doesn't need anyone. There's so much research done that when men think like this, they are twice as likely to experience depression and suicidal thoughts, and then to be not only damage themselves, but damage other men and especially damage women. I think we need to realize that young men are hurting, and some of the stereotypes of society are the problem. Never mind the family systems and the judicial systems, just the way of thinking that Western culture and traditional cultures come together to put this pressure on men. And then you combine that with the way they see women as being in service of them, less than them. We need to do some work on the way of seeing in society. That's part of the system solution too. And then as we help young people to heal themselves and heal each other, I think that agency comes.
Well, thank you so much, Terran and Sakhiwo. Eye-opener, really, and we need to have a lot more of these conversations. Terran Williams is author, researcher, and educator, and Sakhiwo Rala from a community-based organization called Build SA on the challenges facing young people in South Africa. And maybe we can have another conversation in studio so that we are not scuppered by the technological glitches, because this is a very important conversation.